What's up, brothers and sisters? It is time to get real. Thank you for joining us today on Salvation Unmasked. My name is Minister Marvin Lewis. We are going to tell you exactly what Salvation Unmasked is all about. It's all about bringing to light many of the things that have been masked in the body of Christ for many, many years. We want to show you the not so nice side of Christianity. We want to let you know that believers, we got struggles too. But it is through those struggles that we learn a closer walk with the Lord Jesus Christ, and we learn to walk in the newness of life. And my guest today is going to help us talk about that. My guest today is an internationally recognized and published author, poet, and social justice advocate. And she wants to tell you today, through her personal struggles, how she was able to obtain that walk with Jesus Christ and many other things. But I'm going to let her get into that. Please give a warm welcome to author and poet Stephani E.D. McDow. God bless you.
God bless you, Minister Marvin. Thank you so much for having me.
All
Am I
right.
echoing?
Nope, I think you're fine now.
Lovely.
All
Okay.
right. So tell us a little bit about yourself here. Bullet point bio.
Sure. So I'm a DC native who've been writing since I was like 9 years old. I went to Duke Ellington School of the Arts and went on to complete my degree in humanities and English. So I began to pursue my day job, if you will, with my passion job being my writing. And during the day, I became a nonprofit professional that specialized in adult learning, professional development, program management, and things of that sort. So I have been doing that for the past 20 years or so and writing for my entire life. The first time I was published, I was 16 years old. And I have been published in online journals, in anthologies, physical literary magazines, and literary journals, and I'm presently working on my novel.
All right. Excellent. Excellent. So, in terms of being published, do you have any suggestions for anyone that currently might be out there that's maybe an unpublished author or someone that's interested in writing, getting into that field? What kind of suggestions would you give them?
Sure. So, one of the things I think people get confused about is that, writing is a very solitude or a solitary activity, which it is when you're kind of in the throes of it and you're creating. However, there is something significant to be said about being connected to a community of writers, of editors, of mentors, of people who've gone that route ahead of you and are able to provide you with some insight and some perspective that you may not have known. And again, the first time I was published, I was attending Duke Ellington, and of course, I'm there for my writing. So I'm surrounded by a community of mentors, teachers who know what I need to know to be able to move forward within that industry. And that has helped me significantly. The next few times that I was published in my adult life, I had aligned myself very closely with another published author and editor. I began to network quite a bit, connect with other writing communities locally, and it does help you to flourish.
Okay, excellent, excellent. And for those that are just joining currently, I see a couple of guest requests to get into the box. Just to let you know, at some point we are going to give you that opportunity to talk to our guests. We want to get a couple of things out of the way first, so just make sure you stick around. Don't go anywhere. We're going to give you that opportunity to get in the guests because I do see one person has already said that I want to be my own publisher, and I'm sure Stephani can help you out with that, point you in the right direction. But yes, don't go anywhere. We are going to give you that opportunity to do such. Before we go any further with that, I also want to know about being a social justice advocate.
Mhm.
What kind of puts you in that arena of being a social justice advocate?
Short and sweet of it is, I even though I can be a little funny about people, I have such a heart for the world. And very specifically, I have a heart for those who don't get the appropriate amount of treatment, whether that be marginalized, whether it be victims. So all of those things just pull at me and tug at my heart so intensely that I simply can't be quiet and I simply can't sit by. So, as a result, I have aligned myself, volunteered for a number of nonprofit organizations that support social justice at my previous place of employment, which was within an industry who believed that diversity meant white women and those of the LGBTQ community only. And this happened, of course, around the time of George Floyd. And as I'm sitting within this organization, within I worked, and I'm quite the minority, I just couldn't take it anymore. So, more or less, I created um, a committee, if you will, a whole charter for our organization, which was an international organization, to not only educate those who worked with us or worked within our organization, but the industry as a whole. So whether it be our members who were cruise lines, who were other suppliers and things of that nature, internationally, to understand and to engage in the conversation around diversity, equity, accessibility, belonging, and inclusion, because it's absolutely necessary and it couldn't go
Absolutely.
unrecognized anymore.
Absolutely. And I want people to take note of something here because again, we're talking salvation based things here. We're going to get into that. But I want you to notice something, and this goes back to a message that I preached earlier talking about occupation, vocation, and calling. When there is a calling that God has placed on the inside of you before the very foundation of the world, there's something that is going to draw you to exactly and specifically what God has put you on here on this planet to do.
Mm-hmm.
You see, it's
Mm-hmm.
one thing to just do something, and it's another thing to do what you've been called to do. And no matter how many times you try to get away from it, it's amazing that some way, in some shape, form, or fashion, God just continues to draw you back to it. It's just like, for example, in media, this is something that's been in my life for since I was a kid. I always had to be behind a microphone in some way, shape, form, or fashion. Couldn't get away from it. I tried several different times, but for some reason, God always draws me back to it. And for those of you that are wondering, what is it that I'm supposed to be in God? Look at what it is that you do naturally. Look at
Mm-hmm.
what it is that you could do without worrying about being paid, without trying to get a paycheck for it. But what is it that just naturally comes from you? And this is what we're talking about with our guest here. As you can see, she just said it's just something that was in her. It was something to do. Let me ask you while I got you here.
Sure.
I keep saying while I got you. It's not like you go anywhere. But
No, no.
how did you? What was your experience of coming to the Lord Jesus Christ? If you don't mind sharing that with us.
No, absolutely. So, before I get into the story, one of the things I'd like to share and that I found so completely true is there's no relationship with God like when you seek Him for yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
Not because the family or the community or the church has expected that of you,
Yeah.
but it's very different when you seek Him for yourself. So
Absolutely.
when I say that, I grew up in a very different situation. You know, my a broken home, if you will. One family was Presbyterian, the other family was Jehovah's Witness. So no one technically taught me or showed me anything about faith. I just went to church or went to the hall. But it wasn't until I was in my teen years that some family members joined a Pentecostal church. And that Pentecostal church had a youth community that I just gravitated toward. And I was saved when I turned 16. But I will say within that church, because people are going to people,
Mm-hmm.
people hurt me. And I ran and I left and I decided for myself that, you know what, I'm going to seek God on my own terms. I said it, didn't quite do it, but I know that He had not given up on me, not by any means. He kept showing up in my life, whether I chose to see it or not. And what truly brought Him to the forefront was after a really wretched situation I had,
Mm-hmm.
and I was lost. And in my darkness and in being lost, I saw him, and right there, open arms, unconditional, like no one here could ever give.
Absolutely, absolutely, and and if you don't mind, we'd like to go into that dark situation just specifically, but I want to put this caveat here. I want people to understand it's one thing to just go to church because that's what you've been used to.
Mhm.
It's one thing to just do the cultural norm because that's what everybody else does. But there is a specific difference between relationship and religion. Religion says I go to church because it's the cultural thing to do. I go to this church because my mama went here, my grandmama went here, her
Mhm.
mama went there, and it's just what we do. But when you have a personal experience with God, there's nothing like it, because at the end of the day, regardless what comes, hell or high water, and you're going to have a lot of it, there's something about that experience that you had, that personal experience, that continues to drive your faith and continue to elevate you in God.
Mhm.
And if you don't mind, I'd love to talk about that particular experience that did happen to you, because I'm thinking it
Sure,
will bless some people here.
sure. First, I will say that even before that situation took place, I am a victim of childhood molestation and sexual abuse from the time I was 2 years old till I was 15. Um, and I think what I'd learned just for self preservation, I just more or less pushed all of that into a closet, closed the door, and locked it, and more or less pretended like it never happened. So again, I said I was 15. Let's fast forward 10 years. When I was 25, I went out. Some friends set me up on a blind date, and it was fine. But on my way home, I was walking home and I was accosted by someone and sexually assaulted at gunpoint. And it's funny because people have said to me, knowing my history, they couldn't understand why that situation, quote unquote, broke me more than the previous. And the only thing that I could come up with is that, for lack of a better saying, I was raised with that other situation. Even as wretched as it was my norm. Whereas this was a completely out of the blue. I didn't know this guy. He didn't know me. It was a random situation. And I really went through a really bad spell. I wouldn't eat, I wouldn't sleep. I was afraid to be alone in my apartment, but if I was in my apartment, I refused to go out. And it was a lot to deal with. I have an amazing community around me, and they were there for me. But my supervisor at the time invited me to his church to have one of his elders pray for me. And I was like, well, sure, why not? Because why not?
Right.
I was I was looking for any and everything because all my life, and people have talked about how strong I am, how resilient, et cetera, et cetera. But what they did not know, I was reaching for straws. I was looking. I needed help, but didn't know how to ask for it or where to go for it. So he offered that up, and I went. And I started continuing to go to that church because what I loved about it was that I was being taught
Yeah.
for the first time in my life as a Christian, in my life being saved. I was being taught.
There you go.
And that was something that really, really turned things around for me.
Absolutely. Y'all hear this now, that she's been taught. Again, we go back to relationship versus religion. Religion, again, is I go through this ritual every Sunday. But relationship is, God, what is your word saying to me? And I want I want people to understand this. And again, this is what Salvation Unmasked is all about. We as believers, many times the things that we project to people and the things that people see is that their life looks perfect. It looks like nothing goes wrong. They look like they don't haven't been through anything.
Mhm.
But people don't seem to understand that when the cameras go off, when the TikTok lives go away, there's a relationship with God that has been cultivated sometimes, well, many times through adversity.
Mhm.
And I'll be honest with you, I wouldn't want to serve a God that I couldn't know personally as being a deliverer. You
Mhm.
know, it's one thing to hear what the word of God says about him being a deliverer, and it's another thing to have been in a situation that was so adverse, that was so negative, that was so bad that you just couldn't see any way out of it. And here comes your deliverance.
Mhm.
That's where the solidity of that comes in there.
Yeah,
Any more thoughts on that? Go ahead.
absolutely. So, what's funny to me is after that took place and I began to learn and develop a relationship with God on my own, I went through imposter syndrome in the church because of exactly what you were speaking of, the expectation. You behave a certain way. You have to do things this way or that way, because that is the culture of the church,
Yeah.
particularly the culture of the Black church. You're expected to do A, B, C, and D. If you don't say this particular things when you're speaking in tongues, you're not really speaking in tongues.
Come on. Come on.
If there's so many different things. So I went through imposter syndrome, and honestly, to this day, I still battle with that a little bit. I'll tell people, you know, I, I'm not the kind of Christian you're used to. I'll go into the church, and sometimes, honestly, I get a little frustrated because if I'm visiting a church and I'm trying to hear what the pastor is saying, and I can't because people are around me. I hate to say it, but I used to call it praise Tourette's,
Come on. Come on. Mm-hmm.
because instead of listening and hearing what's being taught and preached, there's praise so loud and so back to back by individuals, and it's so very emotional, and I'm like, I get it. There have been times I get extraordinarily emotional when I think about the goodness of God and what he's done for me in my life. Absolutely, I get emotional, but it's not just that. It is not just that. I need to understand and know what he would have for me,
There you go.
what he needs me to do. Why has he blessed me with the gifts that he's given me? I need to begin to study and have this understanding, and all of these traditions and expectations of how you should behave can get in the way.
Exactly. Now, the thing in which you described, honestly, we're talking about 99% of folks that go to the house of God on Sunday morning. And I'm not saying that everybody in the house of God does it. Just hear what I'm saying. That we come into a situation where folks are so into the message or so into the praise and everything else like that, and shouting, speaking tongues, and everything else like that. And we miss the very essence of what God has us there for in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
If you, and it's wonderful, and just so anybody understands, we're not coming against praise itself, because I'm telling
Right.
you, I shout the house down my daggone self. But there comes a time that you need to know what you're shouting about. You need to understand this God that you're shouting about. You need to understand, why am I shouting? Why am I a born again believer? Why is Jesus the way, truth, and the life? And no one can come to the Father but by him. Why are these things? Because honestly, praise is only going to take you but so far, especially
Yes.
on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
That emotional feeling is only going to do but so much for you, because come Sunday night, all the way up and through Saturday morning, until it's get Saturday night, and maybe until Sunday morning, you got an entire life that you got to live. Whether it's your job, whether it's your home, whether out in the street, whether down getting a Subway sandwich, and if you have no foundation of the Word of God, you're just basically a sounding brass and tinkling cymbal. I'm sad to
Mm-hmm.
say. And this is the same battle that people have been going through in the church for many, many years. We
Mm-hmm.
get emotional, and I love how Pastor Darren Bennett said, I had him on the show. He said, it's like I get you to jump high, but the problem is when you fall back down, you're walking crooked.
Mm,
So what have we
mm,
essentially accomplished? We've
right,
accomplished nothing. And
right.
that's in essence what she's talking about here.
Hmm. And another thing that I think put me in that position is the obsession with appearances that a lot of people tend to have, whether it's in the church, whether it's in regard to their family. So when I go back and look back at my situation and how I grew up and what I went through, as long as everything looked fine and looked okay, then everything was okay.
Right.
Doesn't matter how messed up everything truly was. And I hate to say it, but there have been situations where I've been in the church and that has been the exact thing. You know, if I look like a saint, walk like a saint, talk like a saint, obviously I'm a saint.
Right.
And I'm sorry that that doesn't work for me. It
No, it
doesn't make
doesn't.
sense whatsoever.
Nope, nope, it doesn't. And just so we're clear and everybody understands, this is not telling you as a believer, and I hope all of y'all are hearing me when I say this, it does not mean that your life is perfect, okay?
Mm-mm.
It does not mean that when you come into the house of God that just because you're praising and worshiping that everything in your life is right. Because I'll be quite honest with you, a good percentage, no, I'm not going to say a good percentage, I'm going to say 100% of the folk that you see that is sitting next to you, they've got issues, every single one of them. Because if you didn't have issues, Jesus would have carried you home. It's just
Mm-hmm.
that simple because there's no more purpose for you to be here. But he left you here because you've got issues, you've got situations, you've got problems going on. And a lot of the folks that you see is shouting, a lot of times, many of them are not shouting because their lives are perfect. A lot of us are shouting because, Lord, thank you because you had mercy on me. Because you could have allowed me to die in my sin. You could have allowed me to die in my foolishness, but you were gracious enough to me. You are wonderful enough to me that you gave me an opportunity to be in your house one more day just to get it right. That's why
Mm-hmm.
the Word of God talks about every morning that there's a new mercy. And I had this as a TikTok a couple days ago that said, you can't do nothing about yesterday. You
Mm-hmm.
messed up some stuff. You can't go back and change it. But what you can do is you can go forward and not have your have your hand to the plow and not looking back because you're not going to be fit for the kingdom because you're going to eventually start going in circles.
Mm-hmm.
So again, when we talk about the praise and worship, don't be ashamed of praise and worship, but understand there's much more to it than that. There's much more to your life than that.
Absolutely.
Amen. Go
Absolutely.
ahead. Go ahead. I don't know
No,
if you.
I would.
Yeah.
No, just I was going to mention, when you were speaking, it made me think of, when that situation happened to me when I was 25. It was during a period where, for lack of a better saying, I had strayed the furthest away from God during that time. And at the end of that situation, the assailant had me lay down face first in the woods and put the gun to the back of my head and let me know at that moment that he was going to kill me. And I expected it. I was just like, okay, well, this is it. But God,
There you go.
someone came home to the building that we were near to and was walking up the walkway, and it startled the assailant and he ran off.
My God.
And it was that guy, when I realized the assailant was running away from me, I started to cry out to the guy who was walking home, and he helped me call the police. And yeah.
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, did they ever find out who this person was?
Yes. So many years after,
My God.
um, I got contacted by the police, and they were like, we need to talk to you, A, B, C, and D. No, it was, I'm sorry. It was the attorney, state's attorney. And it turns out they had arrested him for some other crime, ran DNA, and found out information about me. And they wanted to charge him for what he'd done to me because it was a heavier sentence.
Yeah.
So they inevitably did, and it was court back and forth. And here's the kicker. this guy went through a number of attorneys, but at some point, one of his attorneys told him my name. Again, I was a random. He didn't know who I was, but he told him my name. And then there was a mix up, and he was released
Wow. Lord have
knowing
mercy.
my name.
Jesus.
So the state was required to relocate me. I was a single mom raising a son. And of course, going back through all this again, it did nothing but reawaken everything that as if it had just happened. So I relocated, and I have been going back and forth um, to court about this situation. The last time was, I think it was 2015. I went in because the state's attorney reached out to me and said that he was about to be released for something, but my testimony. Now, mind you, the entire time I've been going through this all these years, I never actually had to go into the court, and I never had to see him until this time.
Oh, Lord.
So I had to go in and more or less speak my truth. And it was the first time, and it was extremely difficult.
I'm sure.
That was the first time in everything that has ever happened to me that I actually faced and stood my ground, albeit with a couple people holding me up. God knew.
Yeah.
Up, stood up
Yeah.
to the person who hurt me. And he was not released. He was required to complete his sentence, which he did.
Good.
And I haven't heard anything since. On occasion, I get an update on his status.
Right.
If he's still in, if he's on probation, whatever the case may be. But
Right. It's still good. Right.
I'm in a better place now with it. I was obsessed for a long time because my concern was he knows me. He can look me up at any moment because I'm a writer. I'm a poet. My information is out there, you know, and I still live in the same state. So, I was concerned, but I mean, I'm significantly better now. I will say, as I continue to go to God in prayer on this,
Yeah.
seeking healing,
Yeah.
I was so frustrated because I didn't feel like I had healed
My God.
from any of it. And when I was praying, God said to me, you can heal by helping.
My God. There you go.
And it was so clear, and it made so much sense when he said it. And immediately, in every circle, I began to be more vocal. I became a volunteer speaker for the RAIN Association. I started a lot of advocacy work around Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And I have helped a couple of people. They've come to me, they've never spoken out about it. They felt like they couldn't because no one would understand. And, I've always made myself available. I'm like, if you need to speak to someone about this, I'm here. There's no judgment because I know the difficulty when it comes to victims of any sort, particularly in this society where victim blaming is a thing, a huge thing.
Very
So,
much.
God spoke to me. He said, you will heal by helping others. So that's what I do.
Absolutely. And notice this when she says heal by helping. It's one thing, and I want to kind of talk to preachers now, and I just want to just kind of deviate from this, but I want to stay on this point. When she said heal by helping, it is one thing for us as preachers to preach as though our lives are perfect. It is one thing for us to deliver the gospel of Jesus Christ as if everything in our life is just perfect and hunky dory, and we smile and unicorns blossom. And it is another thing to actually help somebody else while you're going through your own personal turmoil. I'm gonna use this as an example from the Word of God, and I love going back to Joseph, the Old Testament Joseph. Joseph did nothing to nobody. Joseph was minding his own business. His brothers could not stand him. They took him, they threw him in a pit. They sold him into slavery. His entire life changed. He did nothing to anybody. He got that whole spirit of organization in which he had. He was able to go into the house of Potiphar and become the second power in that house and had the entire house running under his jurisdiction. So God was promoting him and doing things in him, even in the midst of a situation where he didn't do nothing to nobody. He was helping that man in that household. And along comes his wife, says, come lay with me, tells a lie on him. They throw him into jail for something he didn't do. Now, mind you, again, this is a man that's not bothering anybody. And even in the jail, that gifting of helps and that gifting of organization was still in him. And even in the jail, he was still doing what God called him to do. I'm driving to a point here, y'all. And through all of that he went through, he ultimately had to be called upon by Pharaoh to actually deliver millions of people, became the second power in Egypt. But had he not gone through everything he went through, he would have never been able to be the position that he was in. Some 30 years later, to save and bless the lives of millions. And I say this to go back to the point that she made, by help, by healing. You can be in a situation where you're hurting, where you're in pain, and you can crawl up in a corner and suck your thumb and say, woe is me, or you can get up and do and still go forward in what God has called you to do. Now the question is, what will you choose? It's really just that simple. And let me say this too, and I'm gonna get back to Stephanie again. Let me tell you this: it's not something that's simple, because there's going to be pain. Because she's already told you, listen, there's some painful stuff, and she's still dealing with it, still dealing with it. But yet she has chosen that. Look, I'm going to go forward to what God called me to do. Because guess what? God has used this situation. God has used. I'm not saying he created, but he used this situation to not only help someone else, but to be on this platform right now and still continuing to help. So look at your own personal situation. Look at what you're going through. Do you want to say, oh, it's me? Or, oh, how great is my God? Just as simple as that. Yeah. Now, I want to go to another point here, because let's fast forward a couple of years later. And you have a particular health issue that you're dealing with now. And I want to talk about that, and we'll give some information on that as well. Go ahead.
Sure. So, for the most part, I've been sick on and on my whole life. Each particular thing addressed or what have you. But I started getting notably sicker around 2018. A number of things started happening to me, and no rhyme or reason. I started having thyroid issues, and at the beginning of 2020, my thyroid had to be removed. I'm like, okay. Then we get hit with the pandemic. Um, a couple of months into the pandemic, I started having pain in my legs, couldn't figure out what was going on. Shortly after that, I was hospitalized with multiple blood clots in both lungs and my legs. Um, after being in the hospital for about a week during the most scary time you could ever imagine during COVID, and no one could come visit me. It was pretty rough. But I get out, I'm like, okay, no biggie, go on with my life. Not so much. A couple of months again, I was back in the hospital with more blood clots, lungs and legs. Came out, I'm like, okay, this is madness. They're trying to give me medicines, but they're not working. The next month, I am back in the hospital with more blood clots. And I'm just like, what's going on? Out of everything that has ever happened to me, this was the very first time in my life where I was like, why? I don't understand. And I will tell you that I came to that understanding, but at that moment, I had no clue.
Well, I mean,
But I began to chase trying to understand, this health situation. Um, but lo and behold, by the end of 2020, I was diagnosed with systemic lupus erythematosus. Lupus, I have the main one, the big one, as well as something called antiphospholipid antibody syndrome. That is the reason for all the clotting, and I have fibromyalgia. So it was funny, well, not funny, obviously. Um, the
strange.
doctor
I got
called
it.
me strange.
Mm-hmm.
The doctor called me at like 7 a.m. in the morning and told me all of this and told me all of these prescriptions she was sending to the pharmacy. And I hung up the phone and I was relieved because I finally had answers. But I recognized shortly thereafter that I never, quote unquote, grieved the news. So again, I began to go on a bit of a spiritual search, trying to understand what is going on. Why am I being attacked like this? Then I go back to the beginning of 2020, before the pandemic hit. I was excelling like mad in my day job. I had received the largest bonus I had ever received in my life. I was getting praise and recognition throughout the industry. I had just gotten published in a notable anthology that had received awards. I had went to my first writers conference, and I attended a reading. I was making amazing connections. My writing began to flourish again, and things were just going beautifully. Even when the pandemic hit, I was still flourishing in my gifts and what I was called to do in this world. The next thing you know, literally 3 attacks on my life.
God.
All of those blood clot situations were life threatening. And I came to this recognition and I was like, wow. And I was like, the enemy is really coming for me. So that tells me that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
There you go.
And it's funny because just as I came to that recognition, I was having abdominal pain. I go into the hospital and I ended up being in there for 2 weeks, being fed intravenously, and ended up having to have part of my colon removed because I had an abscess. And it was problematic because of the blood thinners that I was on. It was just so much going on. And I was, I just had a conversation with God. I was just like, I get it. I'm going to continue to get attacked so long as I continue to walk in my purpose.
There you go.
And a lot of people often ask me, even to this day, so just fast forward with all the health stuff. Last year, I had another issue that landed me in the hospital, and my doctor was like, that's it. Let's not work for a little while. And I haven't worked since, not a day job, if you will. And people often ask me, I have really bad days, really bad weeks, months. I'll be completely honest. If you follow me here on TikTok, you know that I'm very transparent. Probably the vast majority of my TikToks, you see me, I'm in bed. But people often talk to me and tell me how strong I am and how resilient, and I can't believe that you continue to go places and do things. You went to Paris for 2 weeks by yourself, during all this that you're going through. And I'm just like, I'm just meant to be so much more than someone who's been abused and someone who is sick.
There you go.
That is not the purpose for which I am here.
There you go. I want to read this to y'all. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse number 6. This is the Apostle Paul talking, and I want you to hear very carefully the verbiage here. For though I would desire to glory, I shall not be a fool, for I will say the truth, but now I forbear, lest any man should think of me above that which seemeth, which he seeth me to be, or heareth of me. And lest I should be exalted above measure through the abundance of revelations, there was given to me a thorn in the flesh, the messenger of Satan to buffet me, lest I should be exalted above measure. For this thing I besought the Lord thrice, three times. Three times. This is the Apostle Paul talking, who prayed three times. We're talking about Apostle Paul, the mighty miracle working Apostle Paul. He besought the Lord three times that it might depart from me. Look what God said. And he said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. And this is what Paul says. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather glory in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest on me. In essence, this is exactly what she is saying. She's basically telling you this. I could look at all of the stuff that's happened to me. I can look at all of this mess, and I can curl up and die in a corner. I can look at what's going on, and we could say, God, why me? And let me say this to y'all. You ain't been in salvation long enough until you've had a why me God moment, okay? Don't think you're holy and great and you ain't just, you trust me. You know you something when you get to a point where you look up steadfastly toward heaven, say, God, why me? Can I tell you what God's response is when you say, why me? You know what he says? He says, why not you? Why not you? What makes you so special? I'm talking to anybody out there that might be getting offended. I hope you get offended. And I hope you hear me at the same time. Why not you? What makes you so special that things and stuff and overwhelming mess can't happen to you? What did Joseph do to anybody? Nothing. And look what he went through for years. Jesus Christ, the very Son of God, did nothing to nobody. And they crucified him on a cross for 6 hours. And he didn't get no apologies either. Hello? So why not you? So what will be your answer? Will you curl up in a corner and die, or will you listen to what heaven's saying? Heaven's saying, my grace is sufficient. So you know why? Here's the interesting thing about it. He allowed this to happen so that what? Paul would not get so above himself. See, you notice the things in which she listed here. She was saying, I was doing this, I was doing that, I was excelling in my career, I was making this money, I was making these bonuses. And before I get to bread. Before I get to the point that everybody think I'm holier than thou, let me have this messenger of Satan be sent unto me to buffet me, to keep me down here, so that why? I'll always fall down on my knees and recognize just how great God is. Mm-hmm. And that's how you gotta look at it. Saints of God, we've got to not look at our situations as though we are the only ones that are going through something. And this is one of the reasons that Salvation Unmasked is out here, because no matter how bad you think you've got it, and I'm even talking to Stephanie now too. No matter how bad you think you got it, I promise you, somebody would give their left arm to be in your situation.
Yeah, that's the truth.
I promise you. And this is something that should actually make you grateful for the things in your life, grateful for what God has done and is doing in your life and what he's brought you through. Because you could have died in your foolishness. You could have died in your situation, but yet he had grace and mercy to allow you to still be here, because he wants somebody to be blessed by what you've gone through. And before I get too preachy on this, I want to let you know that my live is open right now, because I did see people earlier that were requesting to join the live. I'm sure you probably have questions for Stephanie. If you have it, the live is open now. The box is open, because we're going to keep talking on this venue. Stephanie, you want to go ahead? Because I'll keep preaching. I really will. Go ahead. I really will.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. There is no two ways about it. You go through things. It's the pressure of it, the trial of it. If you think about athletes, they go through things. They have to train.
Yes.
They have to train, they get injured, they learn what to do to not get injured, they get better and better. I almost look at it like a training.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Quite honestly, given the life that I've led, I think I'd be a little concerned and lost if it was perfect.
There you go.
If
There you
things
go.
went really, really well,
Say
I'd
it
be
again.
scared to death
Say it again.
because something's not right, you know?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Something's not right.
Yeah. If the enemy is not attacking you, and everything in your life is just perfect and wonderful, and all your kids just go to school and their smiles and they make straight A's and they come home and they never have any issues. They don't give you no lip. Your daughter don't give you no back talk. Your son cleans his room all the time, and nothing ever happens to you. Somewhere along the line, I ain't even going to sugarcoat it. You done missed God.
Yeah.
Because my word tells me that we're going to suffer trouble. We're going to suffer trial. But you see, Christ learned obedience through the things he suffered. And if you never have a reason to fall down on your knees, when will you ever do it? When will you ever fall down on your knees? And I like what you said when you talked about training. Here's the interesting thing about training. No matter how hard any boxer trains, no matter how hard any athlete trains, they go through months, years, decades worth of training, sometimes for one moment. Think about it. The people that run the 100-yard dash in the Olympics, they trained for years to get to a race that'll last them probably 10 to 15 seconds. And the funny thing is, all of that training that they go through, which is rigorous and it is hard, it's blood, it's sweat and tears, it make you want to snot coming out of your nose and everything else like that. But when you finally get to that moment, you'll realize, my God, this is what it was worth. This is what it was for. And you'll get to that moment when you see all of the things that you've been through. You can turn around and say, God, I thank you. I see what you were doing. I'm sure she can turn around and say, God, I thank you. It wasn't easy. It hurts sometimes. It hurts a lot of times. Sometimes it make me want to give up. Oh yeah, trust me. This is the preacher telling you. You ain't lived until you sometimes said, Lord, I don't know about this God.
Right.
Trust me. And if you haven't, keep living. I promise you something's coming your way. I
Right.
promise you. It will.
I
Go ahead.
can't deny that probably the greatest thing that I've gotten from all of this is perspective. Because if you've gone through things and experienced not just hardships, but tragedies,
Yeah.
it makes you focus on the things that matter most. When you haven't gone through anything or have allowed those things to shape and move you in a different way,
Yeah.
then you're still focusing on the things that you shouldn't be, that does not require your attention.
Come on.
When I tell you I don't sweat the small stuff is an understatement to the way I move through this world.
Come on.
Is I could care less.
Could care
I
less.
see where certain things really get under people's skin, et cetera. And I'm just like, my perspective in the grand scheme of things, that so doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
It
Exactly.
doesn't matter.
Absolutely. And again, just so everybody knows, this is something that is learned. This is acquired because she'll probably tell you the same thing. This is not just something that happened overnight. I didn't magically wake up at 16 and say, oh, this happened and everything. Oh, everything is fine. No, no, I'm quite sure. She'll probably tell you, no, this stuff hurt. There was time I was laying on the edge of my bed crying, snotting, and didn't want to go to work and some more stuff like that. It's just like
Mm-hmm.
forgiveness. If you've never had to forgive anyone for anything that has been major, I mean, and let me say this on the whole forgiveness aspect while I'm talking about this, because, and I can say this from a personal standpoint. I lost my aunt as a result of domestic violence back in 1992. She was brutally assaulted and stabbed to death by her husband, my uncle, back in 1992. Now, this was, I guess, now 30 years ago. Her son saw the entire thing happen. And I'm probably an oddity in my family because I'm one of the individuals that said, if I saw him today, I could still offer him Jesus Christ and not hold resentment against him. Now, I'm not telling you in your life, because I know some people probably look, I don't know, how could he? I understand that. This is something that came over a course in my life, because when you recognize the forgiveness of sin and the debt in which we had to God, and that Jesus Christ wiped that in complete and total debt. He wiped away a debt we had no way of paying. And he told you, you know what? As I've given this forgiveness to you, I want you to take that same forgiveness to others. And I'm not putting Stephanie on the spot here or anything else like that, but there is a point that even, and if she has not already, that she's going to have to forgive that individual for what they did. And I know it's hard for somebody to hear, like, how you going to forgive it? Trust me, you're going to have to. And again, it's a process, y'all. It's a process. I'm not telling you get over it or anything else like that, because again, if you've never been through anything like that, you don't know. You don't know. It's really easy to talk about somebody getting over something. If you're a victim of sexual assault and you've never had that happen to you, you don't know what it feels like.
Yes.
You have no idea what it feels like. So be very careful how you tell somebody to get over it. Well, we got about 5 minutes left here. Any final thoughts or anything that you want to leave us with?
It actually, to touch on kind of what you mentioned, it's important for me to share that if you do come across someone who has been sexually assaulted, the best thing you can do is meet them where they are. Do not try to provide them with advice or guidance. Do not tell them what you would have done. Don't ask them why they didn't do A, B, C, and D. If they have the strength, because it requires strength to be able to come to you and share something like that, is your place to simply listen. And then you ask them, how can I help you with this? You let them direct you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So Stephanie, while I've got you here now, how can people, and just in case anyone that has not followed her, please click on her page, follow her profile. How else can they find you?
They can find me at stephaniemcdow.com. The site is not up at the moment. It's going through some updates. But I'm all over social media as Peculiar Writer.
Peculiar Writer. And she'll tell you as well, she is Stephanie without the E. You know what? If
Stephanie
you follow her,
the E.
you'll know exactly what I'm talking about here. All right. And I think that is pretty much it. We have covered everything that we want to cover here. I want to thank you so much, everybody, for joining us for Salvation Unmasked today. Salvation Unmasked is a ministry of Touch of Love Bible Church located at 13503 Baltimore Avenue in Laurel, Maryland, 20707, where our esteemed pastor is Adewale Mae. I thank you so much for joining me. Listen, as I always tell you, you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. God bless you and have a smile upon you.